Welcome back to the Red Path. Today, I want to talk about a tool to test the efficiency of your World Eaters. Okay, just quick before we start, I would like to remind you that there's a few more days left to enter to win this commission painted Be'lakor. All you have to do is donate $5 to save the children through the link below, and you will be entered to win. That's it. You don't need to subscribe, like, comment, none of that crap. Just donate to charity and we will take care of the rest. Alright, on to the content. Previously, you may have heard me talk about a trinity of attributes that contribute to the efficiency of your units: offensive output, mobility, and resilience. As I've been doing some pretty in-depth theory hammering, I've realised that this was an overly complicated way of looking at it. Essentially, there are actually two components we need to examine for our lists: damage output per round, or more colloquially damage over time, or DOT, and resilience. Let me briefly define them and then I'll go into some detail. So damage output per round is essentially a very easy metric to measure. Look at your list. What units have the opportunity to shoot or fight in round 1 if you go first? Then mathematically work out their average damage versus guardsman equivalents, marine equivalents, terminator equivalents, etc. If you can, with all your buffs and abilities, put out say 30 damage against guard, 15 against line marines and 7 against terminators, or any combination within that. That is your overall damage output in turn 1. When round 2 hits, assuming you've taken no casualties, we're just dealing with raw numbers here after all, some of your slower or shorter range units will now have opportunities. So what's your output in turn 2 and turn 3? It should steadily increase, and assuming no casualties, you should see a consistent damage output over rounds 3 through 5. So then you would take your total damage opportunity for the game and divide it by 5. This is the number. This is the average damage per turn you can hope to achieve. You need to omit things like Overwatch and fighting in your opponent's turn, however, unless they are critical aspects of your output. The second term, resilience, is basically the opposite. How much las fire, bolter fire, melter fire, and all those things can your army absorb? It's a bit more difficult to measure, but you can get a rough guess by calculating your wounds at each interval. For example, 30 wounds at toughness 3 6 up save, 20 wounds at toughness 4 3 up save, and 40 wounds at toughness 7 with a 3 up 5 up. You would make assumptions over how many las shots it would take to eliminate your T3, how many bolters to take out your T4s, and so on and so forth. And then you would come up with a rough guess of how much firepower your opponent will need to totally remove you from the game. Resilience can be measured in several ways: high toughness armies like the Death Guard, reanimation with like the Necrons, weight of bodies with orcs, or combinations of toughness saves and wounds like with knights, common and vulnerable saves like with harlequins, or debuffs like the Alpha Legion also play into this. Okay, so that wasn't such a brief definition, but I felt I needed to provide just a little context to get the idea across. So what does all this mean? Well, the damage per round and resilience of your list will be a starting point to determining its efficiency. Top lists will have high scores for both of these aspects, and it's worth pointing out some critical internal relationships here. An army like World Eaters will typically have a low damage output in rounds 1 and 2, due to combat being difficult to maximise until the mid-game. Armies like the Adeptus Mechanicus can put out vast quantities of damage in even round 1, and through attrition sustain damage long enough to outshoot and then outlive most opponents. They do not necessarily need speed or mobility when they can dominate the kill trade. On the flip side, Drukhari combines solid shooting with very high mobility and very high combat aptitude, alongside a resilience that is based in weight of bodies over saves and toughness. As a World Eater, we cannot readily meet either of these sorts of threats in raw numbers, whether output or ability to absorb. Elite armies strangely tend to suffer by excelling in one or two aspects but being mediocre in the others. This is partially the reason chapters like the White Scars are better equipped at the moment, as they enjoy standard marine benefits of resilience and shooting, but excel at speed and combat. Likewise, the Deathwing can mix absurd resilience with combat on top of mobility options and solid shooting when needed. All is not lost, however, because there are many factors that affect the game state, the table itself being primary. Good terrain, whether a Nova setup, WTC layouts, or the new Games Workshop suggestions, provide good avenues of movement through cover to allow us to remain relatively unscathed until we are able to better capitalise on what we do well. Likewise, being able to fully maximise mobility in combat and shooting somewhat ameliorates our significant lack of resilience. We know combat and tend to do well there no matter what. We should be fairly well schooled in movement, 9-inch pre-game moves, 6-inch consolidates, second and third fight activations, advancing and popping smoke on rhinos, deep striking, the claw, the drill, all these things. Shooting wise, we can also be surprising to an opponent with Khorne as a babysitter and swaying heavier on the guns than people would expect. However, we do simply lack any reasonable resilience. We have no stratagems barring a morale test buff that keeps bodies on the table. It's why the Apostle is often so critical to many lists, and why using terrain is absolutely vital to our plans. So, take a look at your current list. I'm not saying you should do a full mathematical breakdown of it, but you can certainly eyeball it. Are you committing 25% of your points to the round 1 fight phase? Is that really the best use of a quarter of your army? Or would it be better to instead send a smaller force to, say, move block, whilst the bulk of your army positions itself for rounds 2 and 3? Whilst a historical battle generally took place in about 3 phases, the skirmish, the melee, and the massacre at the end, or sometimes capturing prisoners, and this is indeed the war that we World Eaters fight. This is not, however, the battle other armies prepare for. A Roman army may have been the pinnacle of battlefield dominance in its day, but were it to meet an army with access to true ranged weaponry like artillery, or far superior armour like tanks, or dizzying mobility, it would have been annihilated. And whilst we may someday have a bespoke playstyle defined by our stratagems and abilities, we are more or less locked into the use of velites and principes versus howitzers and stealth bombers. Nevertheless, being able to ascertain the output and resilience of your particular army will guide how it might best function in the tempo of the battle. And that's something I will talk about in another video, because knowing the cadence and timing of the fight is absolutely integral to 40k, but perhaps the most critical for World Eaters who thoroughly rely on being able to deliver the perfectly timed touch of death. Alright, that's it for this one. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, subscribing it, leaving a comment. If you didn't enjoy, well, leave a thumbs down and tell us in the comments what you didn't like. It's all good. Okay, until next time folks, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.